Welcome back, fellow travelers of Middle-earth, to another deep dive into one of the Professor's most enduring mysteries. Before we begin tonight's exploration, I'd love to know where in the world you're joining me from, and what time it is as you settle in for this tale. Whether you're listening with your morning coffee in New Zealand, your evening tea in England, or perhaps, like so many in our community, letting these stories guide you gently toward sleep somewhere across the globe. You're all welcome in our fellowship of lore seekers. Tonight, find your most comfortable spot and prepare yourself for a mystery that has puzzled Tolkien scholars for decades. We're about to explore one of the most extraordinary beings in all of Middle-earth. Someone so unique that he breaks nearly every rule the Professor established about power, corruption, and the nature of evil itself. Tom Bombadil, master of wood, water, and hill, eldest and fatherless, the one being in all of Middle-earth who could slip on the One Ring and remain completely, utterly unchanged. When Frodo placed Sauron's ring upon Tom's finger in the house by the Withywindle, something unprecedented happened. Nothing. The ring, which had corrupted kings and driven heroes to madness, which whispered promises of power to every other being who touched it, fell silent. Tom not only remained unaffected by its influence, but treated it with casual indifference that bordered on disrespect. He made it disappear with a laugh. He tossed it into the air like a child's toy. Most shocking of all, he handed it back to Frodo without the slightest reluctance, as if returning a borrowed handkerchief, rather than surrendering the most powerful object in creation. This immunity wasn't accidental or temporary. Tom Bombadil represents something so fundamentally different from every other conscious being in Tolkien's world that the usual rules of corruption simply don't apply to him. But understanding why requires diving into the deepest mysteries of the Professor's cosmology. You see, Tolkien didn't create Tom as comic relief or pastoral decoration. Hidden within this seemingly simple character lies a profound meditation on the nature of power itself, on what it means to exist without desire, and on the kind of being that corruption cannot touch, because there is nothing in their nature for it to grip. The ring's power operates through exploitation of desire. It promises to fulfill whatever the bearer wants most, then gradually transforms that desire into obsession, and that obsession into slavery. But what happens when the ring encounters someone who genuinely wants nothing? Someone whose contentment is so complete that no promise could tempt them? Throughout Middle-earth's long history, every being who encountered the ring experienced its pull. Gandalf feared to touch it. Galadriel was tested by it. Even Faramir felt its whisper. Boromir was consumed by visions of the good he could accomplish with its power. Yet Tom picked it up, examined it with mild curiosity, and set it aside as if it were no more significant than an interesting pebble. This immunity wasn't ignorance. Tom understood exactly what the ring was and what it represented. His casual dismissal came not from failing to comprehend its power, but from existing in a state where such power was simply irrelevant to his nature. Over the next hour, we'll explore 10 interconnected reasons why Tom Bombadil stands alone among all beings in his complete immunity to corruption. We'll discover how his existence predates the very concepts that make rings of power possible, how his relationship with reality operates on principles that make dominion meaningless, how his love for the world is so pure and complete that possessiveness cannot take root. We'll examine why the Professor created this enigmatic figure, and what he represents in the larger struggle between light and darkness. Most importantly, we'll understand how Tom serves as Middle-earth's living proof that there are ways of being that corruption simply cannot touch. So settle in dear travelers, for a journey into the heart of incorruptible innocence. Tonight, we discover why the merriest of all beings is also the most free, and why his laughter in the old forest represents something more powerful than all the rings ever forged. Pull your blankets close and let your breathing slow as we explore the beautiful mystery of a being who owns nothing yet lacks nothing, who desires nothing yet possesses everything that truly matters. The first and perhaps most fundamental reason for Tom Bombadil's immunity to ring corruption lies in a simple but profound truth. He existed long before the very concept of rings of power was ever conceived. When Sauron first began experimenting with the binding of will through crafted objects, Tom was already ancient beyond measure, his nature fully formed and completely settled. Tolkien's writings reveal that Tom was present in Middle-earth during the First Age, possibly even earlier. He witnessed the coming of the elves, observed the first rising of the sun and moon, and walked beneath stars that had shone since the world's making. By the time Celebrimbor began forging rings in Ost in Edel, Tom had already spent millennia developing a relationship with existence that operated on entirely different principles. This temporal precedence matters more than simple chronology might suggest. Tom's consciousness was shaped by direct experience of creation in its purest form, before the corruption and complexity that would mark later ages. He learned to exist in harmony with the world during a time when such harmony was still natural and uncomplicated. The professor understood that beings develop spiritual patterns based on their earliest and most formative experiences. Tom's foundational relationship with reality was established during ages, when power meant stewardship rather than domination, when strength expressed itself through nurturing rather than controlling. Ring magic operates by exploiting psychological structures that simply don't exist in Tom's makeup. The One Ring gains its hold by amplifying whatever form of will to power already exists within a being's nature. It takes the seed of desire for control and grows it into consuming obsession. But Tom's nature was formed during a period when such seeds were never planted. Consider what this means in practical terms. Every other being in Middle-earth, no matter how noble, possesses some element of the acquisitive instinct. Elves desire to preserve beauty. Men seek to build legacies. Dwarves accumulate treasures. Hobbits want comfort and security. Even the Valar exercise authority over their respective domains. Tom alone, among conscious beings, developed without any trace of the possessive impulse. His relationship with his territory around the Withywindle isn't ownership, but something closer to symbiosis. He doesn't rule the old forest. He participates in its life so completely that the distinction between ruler and realm becomes meaningless. This predating of ring concepts created a form of spiritual immunity that couldn't be overcome by any later development in the technology of corruption. Tom's nature was set in stone, so to speak, long before the ring's particular form of temptation existed. He's like a lock that was made before the key that might open it was invented. The ring's whispers, its promises of power and control, its visions of dominion and mastery, all fall on consciousness that literally cannot process such concepts as desirable. It's not that Tom resists these temptations through strength of will. It's that his mind lacks the conceptual framework necessary to understand why anyone would want such things in the first place. When Tom handled the One Ring, he was encountering a form of corruption specifically designed to exploit psychological patterns that his primordial nature had never developed. The ring's power met something it had no tools to influence. Like a virus encountering an immune system, that operates on completely different biological principles. This temporal immunity extends beyond mere personal resistance to represent something profound about the relationship between innocence and corruption. Tom proves that there are ways of being so fundamentally pure that even the most sophisticated forms of evil simply cannot find purchase on them. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Tom Bombadil's nature is his apparent existence outside the fundamental framework that governs all other conscious beings in Middle-earth. The music of the Ainur, which established the themes and patterns that would shape all of creation, seems to have no direct influence over him. He operates according to principles that predate even the cosmic symphony itself. Tolkien's cosmology establishes that every being in Middle-earth, from the mightiest Valar to the smallest hobbit, exists as part of the great music that began before time itself. Their natures, their destinies, their very capacity for thought and feeling, all flow from themes that were woven into creation's foundational song. Even Melkor's discord was anticipated and incorporated into the larger harmony, but Tom appears to stand apart from this universal pattern. His behavior, his relationship with time and space, his complete indifference to the concerns that motivate every other being, all suggest someone whose existence operates on different principles entirely. This separation from the music explains why ring corruption cannot touch him. The One Ring's power derives from Sauron's participation in the original song, his understanding of the themes that govern desire and will among created beings. But Tom's consciousness wasn't shaped by those themes, making him immune to influences that depend on them for their effectiveness. The professor hints at this separation in Tom's own words about his primordial nature, when he speaks of remembering the first raindrop and the first acorn. He's not simply claiming great age, but describing a form of existence that witnessed creation from outside its governing structure. This outsider status manifests in countless small ways throughout Tom's appearances in the narrative. His casual treatment of time, his ability to command Old Man Willow and the Barrow-wights without apparent effort, his knowledge of events he shouldn't logically know about, all point to someone whose relationship with reality operates on fundamentally different terms. Most tellingly, Tom shows no awareness of the great themes that drive the actions of every other character in Tolkien's works. The struggle between good and evil, the tension between preservation and change, the conflict between individual desire and cosmic necessity. None of these central concerns seem to register in his consciousness as meaningful categories. This isn't ignorance or simplicity, but genuine existence, outside the conceptual framework that makes such struggles comprehensible. Tom lives in a reality where the distinctions that create conflict simply don't apply, where the very foundations of moral drama have no relevance to daily experience. The Ring's corruption works by exploiting participation in the music's themes, by taking the desires and fears that were woven into creation's song and amplifying them beyond healthy limits. But someone who exists outside that song entirely cannot be influenced by techniques that depend on its patterns. When Tom picked up the One Ring, it encountered consciousness that had developed independently of the cosmic structures it was designed to manipulate. No wonder it fell silent in his presence, like a key trying to open a lock that operates on completely different mechanical principles. This separation from the music makes Tom both completely free and utterly unique, the one being in all of Middle-earth who truly exists according to his own nature, rather than as part of a larger cosmic design. The fundamental difference between Tom Bombadil and every other powerful being in Middle-earth lies in the source of his strength, while others derive their capabilities from what they possess, control, or command. Tom's power flows directly from what he is. This distinction creates a form of immunity to corruption that operates on the deepest possible level. Consider how power typically manifests throughout Tolkien's world. Sauron's might comes from his ring and the forces he has gathered under his dominion. Saruman's authority derives from his position, his knowledge, and his accumulated resources. Even Galadriel's influence stems partly from Nenya and her role as protector of Lorien. But Tom owns nothing in any meaningful sense of the word. He claims no territory beyond the small valley where he dwells. He commands no armies, hoards no treasures, seeks no followers. His house contains simple furnishings that serve immediate needs, rather than displaying wealth or status. By any conventional measure, he should be among the weakest beings in Middle-earth, yet his actual capabilities far exceed what his apparent poverty might suggest. He commands Old Man Willow with casual authority that even the ants might envy. He banishes the Barrow-wights with songs that cut through their ancient malice, like sunlight through shadow. His very presence creates zones of safety and peace that supernatural threats cannot penetrate. This power operates through pure being rather than accumulated having. Tom doesn't need to own the old forest to exercise authority within it, because his nature harmonizes so completely with its essential character. He doesn't require weapons or spells to overcome evil, because his existence itself represents principles that corruption cannot endure. The ring's temptation always operates through promises of acquisition. It whispers about what the bearer could gain, what they could accumulate, what they could control if only they embraced its power. These promises fall completely flat when directed toward someone whose strength has nothing to do with possession. Tom's relationship with his environment illustrates this principle perfectly. He doesn't own Goldberry in the sense that husbands might claim wives, yet their bond is deeper than any marriage contract could create. He doesn't possess the streams and meadows around his home, yet they respond to his presence with joy that speaks of perfect mutual understanding. This freedom from possessiveness creates practical immunity to the ring's influence. How do you tempt someone with greater ownership when they have already discovered that true power comes from being rather than having? How do you corrupt someone with visions of control when they have found fulfillment in simply existing in harmony with what is? The professor understood that the deepest spiritual strength comes not from accumulating external power, but from developing internal completeness. Tom represents this principle in its purest form, someone whose being is so full and rich that no external addition could improve his condition. When he handled the One Ring, it encountered consciousness that operated on completely different assumptions about the relationship between power and possession. No wonder it could find no foothold in a mind that had never confused having with being. At the heart of Tom Bombadil's immunity to the ring's corruption lies, perhaps his most remarkable characteristic, the complete and utter absence of any desire to exercise dominion over others. This isn't mere restraint or noble self-control, but genuine lack of the psychological framework that makes such desires comprehensible in the first place. The One Ring's fundamental appeal operates through the will to power that exists, in some form, within every conscious being in Middle-earth. Even the noblest characters feel its pull, because they possess some vision of how the world could be improved, if only they had sufficient authority to implement their ideas. The ring promises to make such visions reality. Gandalf feared the ring because he knew he would use it with good intentions that would gradually corrupt into tyranny. Galadriel was tempted because she could envision a world preserved in perfect beauty under her benevolent rule. Faramir felt its whisper because he wanted the power to protect Gondor more effectively. But Tom experiences no such visions, because the concept of improving the world through control is entirely foreign to his nature. He looks at reality and sees not problems to be solved or situations to be managed, but simply what is, accepted with complete contentment. This absence of reforming impulse appears throughout his interactions with others. When the hobbits arrive at his door, bedraggled and frightened from their encounter with Old Man Willow, Tom doesn't lecture them about forest safety or attempt to teach them lessons about respecting ancient powers. He simply welcomes them, feeds them, and shares his joy in their company. His response to the Barrow Wights reveals this same pattern. He doesn't destroy them out of righteous anger or banish them to protect future travelers. He simply clears them away because their presence interferes with the natural harmony he cherishes. The way someone might move a fallen branch from a garden path, the professor understood that the desire for dominion, however well-intentioned, creates the psychological opening that corruption needs to take root. Even wanting to make others happy, if pursued through control rather than example, can become a form of tyranny that the ring could exploit. Tom's interactions with Goldberry demonstrate what relationship looks like when completely free from possessive dominion. He delights in her presence without claiming ownership, celebrates her nature without trying to direct it, loves her completely without demanding anything in return. This same principle extends to his relationship with the old forest itself. The trees and streams respond to him not because he commands them, but because he participates so fully in their life that cooperation becomes natural. His authority emerges from harmony rather than hierarchy. When Tom handled the ring, it encountered consciousness that literally could not conceive of domination as desirable. The visions of control that formed the basis of its temptation simply had no meaning to someone whose deepest joy came from letting everything be exactly what it was meant to be. The ring fell silent because it had nothing to offer someone who had already found perfect contentment in a reality where dominion was unnecessary. Beyond Tom Bombadil's existence outside the conventional patterns of creation lies an even more profound truth. His consciousness resonates with harmonies so deep and fundamental that the ring's whispers become merely surface noise, easily ignored or dismissed, while other beings hear the seductive melodies that Sauron wove into his masterwork. Tom perceives the underlying cosmic symphony that makes such lesser songs seem trivial by comparison. The professor understood that reality operates on multiple levels of meaning and music simultaneously. The everyday world that most inhabitants of Middle-earth experience represents only the most obvious layer of a vastly more complex harmonic structure. Beneath the surface melodies lie deeper themes, and beneath those lie harmonies so profound that only the most spiritually attuned beings can perceive them at all. Tom's constant singing isn't mere cheerfulness or simple joy in life, though it certainly expresses both. His songs represent active participation in the fundamental music that keeps reality stable and whole. When he sings while walking through his domain, he's not just entertaining himself, but adding his voice to the cosmic chorus that maintains the world's harmony. This connection to the deepest levels of creation's music explains his casual dismissal of the ring's influence. To someone who regularly communes with the harmonies that govern the movement of stars and the changing of seasons, the ring's whispered promises sound like a child's out-of-tune humming compared to a master composer's symphony. The ring's power operates through a sophisticated, but ultimately limited form of spiritual music, designed to resonate with the desires and fears that motivate most conscious beings. Its melodies are crafted to seem irresistible to minds that operate primarily on the surface levels of reality's harmonic structure. But Tom's consciousness dwells in regions where the ring's music simply cannot reach. The frequencies it employs, no matter how skillfully woven, remain confined to relatively shallow layers of cosmic meaning. Someone whose awareness extends into the deepest foundations of creation's song experiences such limited harmonies as mere background noise. This explains the almost absent-minded way Tom handled the ring during his encounter with the hobbits. He wasn't resisting its influence through heroic effort or noble determination. He literally couldn't hear its voice clearly enough for it to register as significant communication. Imagine trying to get someone's attention by whispering while they're listening to a magnificent orchestra performing at full volume. The whisper might be urgent and important, but it simply cannot compete with the overwhelming beauty and complexity of the music that already fills their consciousness. Tom's immunity to corruption stems partly from this same principle. His awareness is so thoroughly occupied with harmonies of genuine cosmic significance that there's simply no room for the petty melodies of power and possession to take root. When the ring fell silent in his presence, it wasn't because its power had been defeated, but because it had encountered consciousness that operated on such a different harmonic level that meaningful communication was impossible. Tom Bombadil embodies something that most inhabitants of Middle-earth have lost so completely they can barely recognize it when encountered. True primordial innocence, the state of being that exists before the knowledge of good and evil creates the internal divisions that corruption needs to exploit. This isn't the innocence of ignorance or naivety, but the far more powerful innocence of complete moral integration. The professor drew deeply from his understanding of prelapsarian existence, that perfect state before the fall that religious traditions describe as humanity's original condition. Tom represents what consciousness looks like when it has never been divided against itself, when desire and fulfillment exist in perfect harmony, when the very concept of temptation has no meaning, because there is nothing to be tempted away from. This primordial innocence manifests in Tom's complete lack of internal conflict. He never struggles with competing desires, never faces moral dilemmas, never experiences the kind of spiritual tension that characterizes the lives of every other conscious being in Tolkien's world. His wants and his actions align so perfectly that the gap between impulse and ethics simply doesn't exist. The ring's corruption operates by exploiting precisely this kind of internal division. It takes the natural tension between what beings want and what they know they should do, then amplifies that tension until it becomes unbearable. The promise of power offers resolution to this internal conflict by suggesting that sufficient control could eliminate the need for moral restraint entirely. But Tom experiences no such internal tension, because his nature has never been divided in ways that create moral struggle. His desires are inherently good, his impulses naturally wise, his inclinations automatically beneficial to himself and everyone around him. There is nothing within him for corruption to grip and twist toward darker purposes. This innocence reveals itself in his relationship with knowledge itself. Tom knows many things, possesses ancient wisdom, understands secrets that even the wise have forgotten. Yet this knowledge never creates the burden of choice that weighs so heavily on other characters. Knowing doesn't separate him from being, understanding doesn't create distance from immediate experience. When Frodo asks him about the ring's nature, Tom's response demonstrates this perfectly integrated awareness. He understands exactly what the ring is and what it represents. Yet this knowledge affects him no more than knowing the color of a flower or the song of a particular bird. Dangerous knowledge remains simply knowledge, without the power to corrupt someone whose nature cannot be divided against itself. The professor understood that true innocence isn't weakness, but the ultimate form of strength, representing consciousness so perfectly unified that corruption has no entry point. Evil requires internal contradictions to work with, divisions within the soul that can be exploited and widened until they destroy their host. Tom's primordial innocence makes him not just immune to the ring's influence, but actively dangerous to forces of corruption, like clean water that dissolves poison simply by being purely itself. One of the most striking aspects of Tom Bombadil's immunity to ring corruption lies in his fundamentally different relationship with time itself. While every other being in Middle-earth experiences existence as a linear progression, from past through present toward future, Tom inhabits what can only be described as an eternal present, making him immune to the temporal manipulations that form a crucial part of the ring's power. The One Ring operates partly through the promise of extended time, offering its bearers the prospect of lengthened life and preserved youth. This appeal proves irresistible to beings who experience time as a precious and dwindling resource, who feel the constant pressure of mortality or the weight of ages passing. The ring whispers that with sufficient power, time itself could be controlled, slowed, or even stopped, but Tom shows no awareness of time as a limitation or constraint that might need to be overcome. His conversations with the hobbits reveal someone who experiences past, present, and future as equally immediate realities, rather than separate states of being. When he speaks of ancient events, they seem as vivid and current to him as what happened moments before. This temporal fluidity appears throughout his interactions with others. He knows about events occurring far from his domain, speaks of future possibilities with casual certainty, and references ancient happenings as if they were recent news. His consciousness seems to exist in multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. The professor understood that our experience of time as linear progression creates much of the psychological pressure that makes corruption possible. The fear of death, the regret over lost opportunities, the anxiety about uncertain futures, all provide emotional leverage that skilled manipulators can exploit. Tom's existence outside conventional temporal flow makes him immune to these time-based fears and desires. Someone who experiences all moments as equally present cannot be tempted by promises of extended life or threatened by visions of future loss. The urgency that drives most decision-making simply doesn't apply to consciousness that dwells in eternal now. This different temporal relationship also explains Tom's casual treatment of apparently urgent situations. When the hobbits arrive, terrified and exhausted from their forest ordeal, he responds with the unhurried care of someone for whom emergency and leisure exist as artificial distinctions rather than meaningful categories. The ring's corruption requires beings who experience scarcity, limitation, and the pressure of time running out. These conditions create the desperate need for control that makes the ring's promises seem attractive. But Tom's consciousness operates in a realm of temporal abundance, where such pressures have no meaning. When he handled the ring, it encountered awareness that existed outside the temporal framework its power was designed to exploit. No wonder it seemed like nothing more than an interesting trinket to someone whose relationship with time made its promises irrelevant. The ring's most insidious power lies not in its overt promises of dominion, but in its ability to identify the incompleteness that exists within every conscious being and promise to fill those gaps. It whispers to each individual about what they lack, what they've lost, what they failed to achieve, offering itself as the solution to their deepest sense of inadequacy. But Tom Bombadil presents the ring with something it has never encountered before, a being who genuinely lacks nothing. This completeness isn't the result of having acquired everything he wanted, but rather the natural state of someone whose very existence embodies perfect fulfillment. Tom doesn't struggle with unrealized dreams, unfulfilled ambitions, or the nagging sense that life should somehow be different than it is. His contentment runs so deep that the concept of improvement seems meaningless when applied to his condition. Most beings in Middle-earth carry wounds from their past, regrets about choices made or unmade, anxieties about futures they cannot control. These psychological gaps create the emotional hunger that makes the ring's promises seem attractive. The ring offers healing for old hurts, resolution for ancient grievances, power sufficient to prevent future losses. But Tom shows no evidence of such psychological wounds or unfinished business. His interactions with others reveal someone whose emotional and spiritual development reached completion long ago, leaving no unhealed places where corruption might take root. The professor understood that wholeness creates a natural immunity to temptation because complete beings have no needs that external power could satisfy. The ring's offers fall flat when directed toward someone who has already achieved the peace and fulfillment that others desperately seek. This completeness manifests in Tom's relationships, his daily activities, even his simple pleasures. When he tends his garden, he does so with the satisfaction of someone who has found perfect expression for his nature. When he speaks with Goldberry, their communication flows with the ease of beings who have discovered ideal companionship. The ring encounters in Tom a consciousness that has no empty spaces to fill, no broken pieces to mend, no inadequacies to address. Its promises of power, knowledge, and control are like offering food to someone who has never experienced hunger or shelter, to someone who has never felt cold. When the hobbits arrive at his door, Tom welcomes them with the same joy he shows in greeting the sunrise or hearing birdsong at dawn. His affection for them is immediate and complete, but it doesn't diminish his love for anything else, or create new anxieties about their safety that the ring could exploit. The professor recognized that unconditional love creates practical immunity to corruption because it eliminates the scarcity thinking that makes power seem necessary. Someone who loves everything equally has no reason to seek control over anything specifically. When Tom handled the ring, it encountered consciousness organized around love so pure and comprehensive that possessive desire had no meaning. The ring's whispers about protecting and controlling what he cared about fell on awareness that had transcended such limited categories entirely. The deepest reason for Tom Bombadil's immunity to the ring's corruption reveals itself when we understand his true function within the larger ecology of Middle-earth. Tom doesn't simply resist evil through personal virtue or individual strength. He represents something far more fundamental, the world's own natural defense mechanism against spiritual infection, a living embodiment of the principles that keep corruption from spreading beyond certain limits. Every healthy system requires some form of immune response, some way of identifying and neutralizing threats before they can cause systemic damage. In biological organisms, this function is performed by white blood cells and antibodies that recognize foreign invaders and eliminate them before they can establish colonies within the host. Tom serves this same essential function for Middle-earth's spiritual ecosystem. His presence creates zones of absolute purity where corruption cannot take root, no matter how powerful or sophisticated. The old forest around his home remains healthy despite the malevolent influences that have infected other woodland areas throughout the continent. This immune function operates automatically, without conscious effort on Tom's part. Just as biological immune systems respond to threats without requiring deliberate activation, Tom's purifying influence works continuously to maintain spiritual health in his domain. The professor understood that evil, like disease, spreads through contact and contamination. Corruption moves from host to host, establishing colonies of malice that can eventually overwhelm entire regions if left unchecked. The presence of natural immunity becomes essential for preventing such total systemic collapse. Tom's immunity to the ring demonstrates this principle in its purest form. When the most sophisticated corruption ever devised encountered his consciousness, it didn't just fail to establish control, it was actively neutralized, rendered harmless by contact with awareness so thoroughly healthy that infection became impossible. This neutralizing effect extends beyond Tom himself to influence his entire environment. Creatures that might normally be susceptible to corruption find themselves unable to maintain malevolent intentions within his territory. The Barrow-wights, powerful enough to threaten even experienced travelers, dissolve like shadows at his approach. The Old Man Willow, normally a hostile and dangerous entity, becomes merely mischievous rather than malevolent when Tom is present. His influence doesn't destroy the tree's essential nature, but purifies it of the corrupted elements that make it truly dangerous to others. Middle-earth's spiritual health depends on having such zones of natural immunity scattered throughout its landscape. Without them, corruption would eventually spread unchecked until no clean places remained anywhere in the world. Tom's casual dismissal of the ring wasn't just personal immunity, but the immune system's natural response to infection. His consciousness recognized the ring as a spiritual pathogen and neutralized it automatically, protecting not just himself, but the entire region from contamination. The professor created Tom as proof that some things in creation remain forever beyond corruption's reach. Natural guardians whose very existence ensures that evil can never achieve total victory. And so we reach the end of our journey into the beautiful mystery of Tom Bombadil's incorruptible nature, where we've discovered that his immunity to the ring's power stems not from strength or wisdom alone, but from representing something far more profound, existence in its purest and most complete form. The 10 aspects we've explored tonight weave together into a tapestry of perfect spiritual health that corruption simply cannot penetrate. Tom's nature predating the very concept of rings, his existence outside the song of creation, his power flowing from being rather than having, his complete lack of dominion's desire, his connection to the deepest cosmic music, his primordial innocence, his transcendent relationship with time, his absolute completeness, his universal love, and his function as Middle-earth's spiritual immune system, all combine to create something unprecedented in Tolkien's world. What emerges from this exploration is the professor's most hopeful message about the nature of good and evil. Tom proves that corruption, no matter how sophisticated or powerful, has limits that cannot be transcended. There are ways of being so fundamentally pure that darkness cannot touch them, forms of existence so complete that temptation becomes meaningless. Tom Bombadil stands as Middle-earth's living proof that innocence, when truly achieved, becomes the strongest force in creation. His merry songs and casual laughter represent something more powerful than all the rings ever forged. The joy of beings whose nature aligns so perfectly with reality's deepest harmonies, that corruption sounds like static compared to the symphony they hear. Perhaps this is why the professor created Tom as he did, not as a hero who struggles against evil, but as someone for whom evil simply has no meaning. In a world filled with wars and corruption, with rings of power and fallen wizards, Tom reminds us that there are still places where the grass grows green, where love flows freely, and where the most dangerous artifact in creation becomes nothing more than an interesting trinket to be examined and set aside. His immunity to corruption isn't something to be envied or imitated through effort, but something to be celebrated as proof that creation contains its own defenses against darkness. Somewhere in the old forest, Tom continues his eternal dance with Goldberry, tending his garden and singing his songs, forever free because he has never been anything else. As you drift toward sleep tonight, fellow travelers, perhaps you'll dream of that house by the Withywindle, where time moves differently and corruption has no power, where the oldest being in Middle-earth remains forever young because he has never lost the capacity for wonder. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the sound of Tom's laughter, echoing through halls where darkness cannot enter, and rings of power hold no sway over hearts that have learned the secret of being completely, joyfully, incorruptibly free.